Everyone remembers Jane Seymour as the lucky one, the gentle queen, the perfect wife who gave Henry VIII the son he always wanted and died, loved, honored, remembered. She's the one in the storybooks, soft-spoken, graceful, the queen who tamed the tyrant and brought peace to his court. But what if everything you think you know about her is wrong? What if Jane's silence wasn't virtue, but calculation? What if her perfection wasn't protection, but her undoing? Because the truth hidden in plain sight is this: Jane Seymour wasn't just the perfect wife. She was the perfect survivor until survival itself killed her. Her story isn't romance. It's power, fear, and the price of playing the quiet game in a world that devoured queens. It's about how the woman who finally gave Henry what he wanted most, a son, became the ultimate victim of that very success. Tonight, we'll uncover the truth about Jane Seymour, the woman who learned from the corpses of two queens, who turned silence into strategy, and whose greatest triumph, the birth of England's heir, ended in her death 12 days later. And by the end, you may find yourself asking, was she really Henry's only true love, or just the one who died before she could disappoint him? Before we begin, remember to like this video and subscribe to Hidden Crowns, because history often buries its most dangerous truths beneath silence. The year was 1536. England had become a nation of whispers. The Pope had excommunicated the king. Monasteries were torn apart. The Tower of London echoed with the footsteps of men who once dined at Henry's table. At the center stood Anne Boleyn, the woman who had turned the king against his church. But Anne's brilliance, her sharp tongue, her passion, all had become her downfall. Henry grew tired of defiance and desperate for a son. Waiting quietly in the wings was Jane Seymour. She was everything Anne was not: plain, pale, soft-spoken. Born around 1508 in Wiltshire to Sir John Seymour, a respectable but minor nobleman, Jane had no fortune, no royal blood, no famous education. But she had something else: the ability to listen, observe, adapt. She served first Catherine of Aragon, then Anne Boleyn. She watched both rise and both be destroyed by the same man. She saw Catherine's faith harden into stubbornness, Anne's wit sharpened into pride, and how both were punished for daring to speak. Jane learned the lesson that saved her life. For a time, silence was safer than truth. Obedience is stronger than love. When Henry noticed her, Jane did not flirt, protest, or run. She lowered her eyes. When he sent a purse of gold, she refused it. When he pressed for affection, she stepped back. She made herself the image of virtue, the mirror opposite of Anne's scandal. That is what seduced him. Not beauty, not passion, but peace. By early 1536, Anne's enemies, Thomas Cromwell, the Seymours, even the Duke of Norfolk, tightened the net. Cromwell wanted her gone. Henry wanted a son. Jane, perhaps unknowingly, became their instrument. In May, Anne was arrested for adultery, incest, treason. Her trial was a spectacle of betrayal. Her uncle, Norfolk, presided. 10 days later, a French swordsman ended her life. The next morning, Henry announced his engagement to Jane Seymour. The timing wasn't poetic, it was obscene. But Henry saw it differently. Jane didn't disrespect Anne's death, she erased it. In her quiet presence, he found absolution. On May 30th, 1536, Henry married Jane at Whitehall. England had a new queen, a third wife in 4 years, and a new myth was born: that the king had finally found peace. But peace in Henry's England was only the calm before another execution. Jane's motto as queen said everything: bound to obey and serve. It was not a declaration of love. It was a survival plan. She knew better than to argue with a king. She dressed simply, spoke softly, and avoided confrontation. She restored modesty to the court and dismissed the French fashions that had scandalized Anne's time. Henry adored her for it, calling her his pearl of womanhood. But Jane was no fool. Behind her quiet smile was a woman who understood influence. She used gentleness to achieve what no one else dared. She convinced Henry to reconcile with his estranged daughter, Princess Mary. No counselor or ambassador could make him do it. Jane did. How? Not by argument, but emotion. She reminded Henry that a true king shows mercy, that God would bless the son of a man who forgave his child. It worked. Mary returned to court, kneeling before her father, tears in her eyes. Henry declared Jane had restored harmony to his family. But harmony in Henry's house never lasted. Jane's real test came not through politics, but through her womb. In 1537, she became pregnant. The kingdom celebrated. Henry, now 46, desperate for a male heir, treated her like a saint. No one was allowed to upset her. He built new apartments at Hampton Court, hung with silk and tapestries of motherhood. For the first time in years, England seemed united. Even those who hated Henry's break with Rome prayed for Jane. If she bore a son, the Tudor future would be secure. But pregnancy in Tudor England was a gamble, and the dice were loaded against women. Medicine was primitive, hygiene non-existent. Many queens died in childbirth, and Jane knew it. Still, she endured silently, never complaining, never showing fear. She was playing her final hand. In autumn 1537, her gamble paid off, at least for a moment. On October 12th, after more than 2 days of labor, Jane gave birth to a healthy boy, Edward, Prince of Wales. Henry's dream. England's miracle. The bells of London rang, bonfires burned, cannon thundered. Henry wept openly. He called Jane his dearest jewel and declared the day holy, giving thanks for the goodness of my sweet queen. But while the nation celebrated, Jane's body was dying. For 3 days, she seemed to recover. Henry kissed her hand, paraded the prince through Hampton Court, radiant. But within a week, Jane grew feverish, her body trembled, her breath slowed. Attendants whispered a word all too familiar, childbed fever. It was the silent killer of mothers, indifferent to crowns. Bacteria from unwashed hands, dirty linens, unsterilized instruments. No one understood the infection. They blamed exhaustion, fate, God. As Jane drifted in and out of consciousness, priests heard her confession. She whispered prayers, asked for her son's safety, thanked Henry for kindness, and never complained. Even in agony, she stayed in character. Obedient wife, silent queen. 12 days after childbirth, on the night of October 24th, 1537, the bells tolled again. Not for joy, but mourning. Jane Seymour, Queen of England, was dead, around 28 years old. Henry locked himself away, refusing to eat or speak. He ordered court mourning in black, demanded no one say death before him, declared that Jane had been his one true love. But grief in Henry's world was never simple. Some said his sorrow was guilt, a man realizing every woman he loved seemed doomed to die. Others said relief. Jane's death froze her perfection. She would never argue, age, or fall from favor. She was the perfect wife because she could no longer fail him. Henry immortalized Jane in portraits and poetry. In Holbein's painting, her face is serene, almost saintly. Her white headdress a halo. She became not a woman but a relic, proof, Henry claimed, that God still favored him. He ordered that he be buried beside her, and he was. But behind devotion lay a darker truth. Jane's death marked the last stage of Henry's transformation, from passionate lover to hollow king. She was the last wife he could idealize. After Jane, marriages were transactions, his heart a monument to what he believed he'd lost. Jane had been balm to his conscience. Now she became its ghost. The court mourned with public grief and private calculation. Within weeks, politics turned. Cromwell, architect of Anne's fall, sought another bride. A kingdom could not depend on a single child. Princes died. Dynasties demanded insurance. Henry wept in the morning and discussed marriage in the afternoon. He may have buried his heart with Jane, but his duty and his ego did not rest. Yet Jane's legacy did not vanish. Her family rose. Brothers Edward and Thomas Seymour became royal favorites, rewarded with titles, estates, influence. The Queen's blood made them untouchable, or so they thought. Power, like infection, spreads fast and kills faster. Within a decade, both brothers were executed for treason, victims of the same ambition that made them. It was as if Jane's ghost followed them, reminding them the price of proximity to the throne never changes. Beyond politics, her death revealed something more profound, the fatal flaw in Henry's vision of love. He pursued three ideals: Catherine, duty; Anne, desire; Jane, obedience. None brought him peace. Jane gave everything: sun, devotion, silence, and still the heavens took her. If Henry saw punishment, he never admitted it. Instead, he built grief into a myth. Jane, the fairest and most virtuous lady that ever lived. Her gilded coffin led a miles-long procession. Banners bore the Tudor rose entwined with the Seymour phoenix. The phoenix rises from its ashes, but unlike the myth, Jane never rose again. For England, her death was more than a royal tragedy. It was an omen. The kingdom had its long-awaited prince at a terrible cost. People whispered, if God took the queen who birthed the heir, what would he take next? Henry ignored them. He celebrated Edward's christening with cannon fire, even named the infant a Knight of the Bath before Jane's body was cold. Yet the echoes lingered. Every time he looked at Edward, he saw the price of his dynasty. Perhaps that is why Henry never truly recovered, not because he loved Jane too much, but because she embodied everything he destroyed to get what he wanted. Her silence made him believe he could rewrite God and man. Her death proved otherwise. The irony is devastating. Jane's victory, producing a son, should have made her immortal. Instead, it killed her. She survived where others fell, outmaneuvered a tyrant, outlived his temper, only to be defeated by biology. Perfect wife, mother, queen, dead in 12 days. But her influence didn't die. Her son inherited her quiet intensity. Edward VI grew into a delicate boy with iron conviction, raised under the shadow of his mother's sacrifice. He was England's future, and Jane's ghost followed him. Edward reigned for 6 years, intensifying his father's religious revolution. He stripped churches, banned the Mass, fixed England firmly Protestant, the ultimate outcome of Henry's break with Rome. But Edward's strength was an illusion. By 15, he coughed blood, too weak to stand. He died whispering prayers to the God his father once defied. The kingdom Jane died to secure was again in chaos. Edward's crown passed briefly to Lady Jane Grey, then to Mary Tudor, and finally to Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter. The daughter of the woman Jane replaced became the queen who defined England's golden age. History has a cruel sense of humor. Henry destroyed Catherine to marry Anne, destroyed Anne to marry Jane, and lost Jane in pursuit of a son. In the end, it was the daughters of the first two, not Jane's son who carried England into the future. The silent queen's legacy was a boy who died young, while the voices of women Henry silenced reshaped history. Perhaps Jane understood this would happen. Perhaps, in silence, she saw the futility, a king chasing eternity and finding emptiness. Maybe that's why she said nothing. Because sometimes silence is not a weakness. Sometimes it's the only truth left. When Jane died, she left the kingdom at peace for the first time in a decade, but it was peace built on ashes. Her death began a legend Henry rewrote until even he believed it. He told the world Jane had been his one true love, the delight of my eyes, and ordered no other woman to share his tomb. To later generations, this looked like devotion. But devotion can be a mask. When a man turns a woman into a saint, he turns her into a memory he can control. Henry could not bear the living truth of women. Catherine confronted him. Anne challenged him. Only Jane obeyed him and died before disobedience could tempt her. He loved her because she never had the chance to contradict him. He could love the idea of Jane because the real Jane was gone. He remade her in his image, meek angel, perfect mother, proof that God smiled on his reign. He turned her death into propaganda. In sermons and pageants, Jane was compared to the Virgin Mary. Artists painted her pale and glowing, hands folded. She was not just queen, she was the answer to his guilt. But if Jane could have spoken, would she accept sainthood or scream? Bells for her son, servants preparing feasts, cannon roaring outside. England rejoiced while she shivered and bled. She must have known she was dying. Perhaps in that final silence, she understood something Henry never would. In a world ruled by men like him, even victory was fatal. Her death was the logical conclusion of the Tudor dream. The king demanded a son. The kingdom offered one, but demanded a life in return. The crown took what it could never give back. It took Catherine's dignity, Anne's body, Jane's breath. It would go on taking. And yet, Jane's quiet death haunted Henry more than any war. He blamed doctors, midwives, God, anyone but himself. But each night, when he looked at Edward's cradle, the echo of her absence filled the room. Henry's later years were marked by decay. His leg ulcer festered, his temper darkened. He lashed out at ministers, nobles, friends. He became a man who could not stop destroying what he touched. He had won the world and lost every woman who loved him. Meanwhile, Edward grew under impossible expectations, treated as a living relic of his mother's sacrifice. Every breath he took was proof her death had meaning. Tudors taught piety, obedience, and the righteousness of reform. He was told his birth redeemed England. But how can a child redeem a sin he doesn't understand? At 9, he ascended the throne, a symbol more than a king. Behind him stood ambitious men, his uncles, Edward and Thomas Seymour, eager to rule through him. They were Jane's brothers and carried her legacy of ambition cloaked in virtue. Like the women of their family, they would not survive Henry's shadow. Thomas was executed for plotting to control the young king. Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, followed to the block. The Seymour dream ended as it began, in blood. History repeated because no one in the Tudor court learned from it. Every triumph demanded a sacrifice. Every crown came with a curse. Jane Seymour, the woman who tried to break the cycle with silence, had made it stronger. Still, she left something behind, subtle but powerful. Through her death, the ideal wife was born. For centuries, English women were told to emulate Jane's obedience, patience, modesty. She became the moral yardstick for queens and wives. The propaganda born of Henry's grief became a cultural weapon. The best woman is the quietest. Virtue is endurance. Dying for duty equals honor. But look closer. Jane's silence was never pure submission. It was survival. She used the only tool her world allowed, the illusion of obedience, to navigate the most dangerous court in Europe. Her silence was not weakness. It was intelligence disguised as virtue. That makes her story not only tragic, but revolutionary. She didn't fight Henry with words like Anne, or faith like Catherine. She fought him with patience. For a brief moment, she won. Her victory was the birth of a prince. Her punishment was death. Henry's later wives lived in Jane's shadow. Anne of Cleves was rejected for not matching her portrait. The artist who painted Jane shaped that image. Catherine Howard was executed for being too young, too lively, too much like Anne Boleyn. Catherine Parr, Henry's last wife, nursed a monstrous king who kept Jane's image on his walls. Even as Catherine read Psalms to comfort him, Jane's face stared down, unaging, unchallenging, forever perfect. That was Jane's ultimate triumph and curse. She became eternal by ceasing to exist. 5 centuries later, historians still debate who she was. Kind and gentle, as contemporaries said, or calculating and ambitious, as critics claim. The truth lies in the silence between the lines. Jane Seymour was both. A woman who wanted to survive and, in doing so, became the symbol of everything women were expected to be. Her story forces a question that echoes through history. How many women have been celebrated for virtues that killed them? How many perfect wives vanished quietly while men built empires on their graves? Jane's silence did not end with her death. It became the foundation of a myth that shaped England. In that sense, she achieved what none of Henry's other wives did. She ruled him in absence, not presence. She became the standard he could never reach again. So when we visit St. George's Chapel at Windsor, where Henry and Jane lie side by side, remember this. He built the tomb, but she built the legend. He conquered nations, but she conquered memory. Jane Seymour, the perfect wife who died after 12 days. The queen who proved that silence can be louder than rebellion. The woman who taught a king that even love, when built on fear, ends in ruin. 500 years later, her whisper still echoes beneath Windsor stones. I gave you everything, and it was never enough. Maybe that's the truest line ever spoken about Henry VIII. No wife could satisfy him. No son could save him. No crown could quiet the hunger that consumed him. Jane's story is not just about a queen's death. It's about the death of illusion, the moment the dream of the perfect wife collapsed under the weight of her perfection. So tell me, when love demands obedience, when silence is survival, when the crown promises eternity but delivers only a tomb, what would you choose? Would you speak, knowing it could kill you? Or stay silent, knowing it already has? That is the question Jane Seymour left behind, and the question every crown still asks. This is Hidden Crowns, where history's quietest voices finally speak, and where every perfect story hides a tragedy waiting to be heard.